It's Thursday, the 23rd of January. My name's Juan Brown. You're watching the Blanco Lirio channel. And breaking news, a Colson C-130 large air tanker is down in Australia. Let's start with the media report from Colson Aviation, the media release. While working in the snowy Monaro area in southern New South Wales, Australia, contact was lost with one of our large air tankers, a Lockheed C-130, registration November 134 Charlie Golf. That's tanker 134. The aircraft had departed Richmond, New South Wales with a load of retardant and was on a firebombing mission. The accident is reported to be extensive, and we are deeply saddened to confirm there were 3 fatalities. The accident response team has been activated, as well as local emergency services. Colson Aviation will be sending a team to the site to assist in emergency operations. Our thoughts and prayers are with the families of the 3 crew members on board. Sincerely, the Colson family. The air tanker industry is a very small industry. When I was in between the military, finishing up my military career and then getting on with the airline some 20 years ago, I did a brief touch and go working with the U.S. Forest Service, training up to be a lead plane pilot, or what they call a bird dog pilot. And I can tell you it's a very tiny industry, and some of those folks are still down there fighting these wildfires in Australia today. So today, though we have very little information to go on this accident, I can give you a little bit more background as to what is going on with the wildfire aerial firefight in Australia today. The aircraft involved in today's incident was November 134 Charlie Golf. I believe that's an EC-130Q model of C-130, which is the structural equivalent of an H model C-130. Colson Air Crane is one of the best contractors in the aerial firefighting business today, and they're based out of British Columbia, Canada. The air crew members flying tanker C-130 are contract air crew members, all from here in the States. The C-130 tanker 134 has a 4,000-gallon retardant tank. By the way, these are not, well, they're called water bombers often in the media, especially down in Australia, but these aircraft are dropping retardant, especially these C-130 aircraft with their retardant tanks. The idea of dropping retardant is to retard the advance of the flames so that ground forces can effectively begin to cut a line around the forest fire. Water is more frequently used in helicopter-type operations, dropping on hot spots on the fire. So generally, these large air tankers are dropping fire retardant, not water. The confusion arises because there's a couple of specialized aircraft that only scoop water, like the now retired Martin Mars and the Canadair Super Scooper. The Colson Air Crane contractor has a fleet of aircraft. They've got up to, I think, 4 of these C-130s, and they are phasing in now the new 737 Fireliner aircraft, which is turning out to be a fantastic new large air tanker aircraft. They also had, remember, the Martin Mars aircraft, the ginormous Martin Mars firefighting aircraft. I think that's since been retired. They also have a small fleet of helicopters, S-61, UH-60, and CH-47 helicopters. Down in Australia right now, fighting the huge bushfires down there, is a fleet of about 70 aircraft, counting all the fixed wing and rotor wing aircraft. Year to date for the firefighting activity in Australia, there has been a total of 5 other firefighter fatalities, 30 total fatalities, a loss of 2,500 homes, and millions of acres burned. Let's talk briefly about the fire situation in Australia. What's burning in Australia is primarily eucalyptus forest. It's primarily a monospecies kind of fire, one single species. Here in Northern California, we got a whole bunch of different species of timber to burn in Northern California. In Australia, it's primarily eucalyptus forest. These forests are in protected areas generally, national parks, wilderness areas, and the towns that surround these forest areas are generally well protected from the forest. That is, they've been logged out, or the towns are protected by farmland surrounding them. So unlike the Paradise Fire, the Camp Fire here in Northern California, the larger town populations are generally well protected from wildfire in Australia. However, what's causing all the giant eucalyptus burns? It's the same conditions down there as what we got up here. It's the deadly combination of a few years of drought combined with years and years and years of fire suppression and a lack of forest management. If you look in the forest fires, the pictures of the forest fires that are coming out of Australia, you will see an excessive fuel loading. The forests are simply too thick, they have not been managed, and they're creating these huge burns now that after a couple of years of drought. There's very little we know about the accident. The accident aircraft departed Richmond Air Base. Richmond Air Base is just northwest of Sydney, a few miles. I've been down there a couple times in the C-130 aircraft and been down there since to visit some of the firefighting crews in years past on one of my 777 layovers. It's one of the few bases where they can load retardant out of Australia, and then they have very long runs to the firefighting, to the fight itself. In this case, it was nearly a 2-hour flight down to where the crash occurred. The crash occurring around 2 p.m., right where, in the middle of the afternoon, where the fires get very aggressive. And what's disturbing about this is that there's reports of wind gusts approaching 60 miles an hour during the time of the accident, which brings into question, in my professional opinion, as to why were the air tankers there at all. The safe and effective use of air tankers means that they're somewhat limited in what they can do. Between the smoke and the visibility and the turbulence, air tankers can't always be out there fighting the fires. Now, was it a structural failure that brought this tanker down? We don't know. It's much too early to tell, but investigators should be able to rule that out fairly quickly once they find what's called the four corners of the aircraft, the nose, the tail, and the two wingtips, and that we'll be able to quickly determine if this aircraft came apart in the air beforehand. Personally, I would be surprised if it did. This is a later model C-130. The last C-130 air tanker structural failure was the C-130A model, which had a completely different wing design to it, a problematic wing design to it, that was patched and patched over the years and eventually failed on an airdrop. Because of the restricted nature of the licensing of this aircraft, it'll be hard to say whether there's going to be any data recorder information available out of this aircraft. There may be some limited data recorder information. There may be some cockpit voice recorder information. We just don't know if that's going to be available on these restricted category air tanker or limited category air tanker aircraft. Outside of structural failure, there's any number of reasons for air tankers to crash while during a drop, and it appears that this may have very well crashed during the drop, though we're not sure if that's the case. You've got so many factors complicating your flight while you're operating as an air tanker. Again, from the visibility, the lack of visibility, terrain being obscured by smoke, the turbulence, the extreme turbulence that's often associated with firefighting activity. Target fixation, we talked about that in a previous video. Stalling the aircraft in a turn, low-level aggressive maneuvering. These are all factors that can come into play during an air tanker drop. Mechanical failure is a possibility, and something that I want to address too is that air crew and pilot fatigue is becoming a bigger factor in these global air tanker operations because we're now operating year-round. In years past, air tanker flying used to be a seasonal job, and you basically had the whole winter time off. Now with global operations extending into the southern hemisphere during the winter time, our winter time up here, these crews are flying all year long, and the crews in Australia have flown over 600 firebombing missions during this fire season alone. Though most of these air tanker captains are initial attack qualified, they usually use the assistance of a bird dog pilot, as they call it in Australia, or a lead plane, as we call it here in the United States, to assist them with their drop. This allows the air tanker pilots to concentrate on their drop and not have to work out the logistics of exactly where to drop their retardant. All that is figured out by the lead pilot ahead of time. Typically, the bird dog or lead plane pilot picks up the tanker over the area of the fire in an orbit. They get in a formation about 1/4 of a mile behind each other. They slow to the appropriate speeds, and initially the lead plane pilot may take the tanker down for a show-me run over the fire before then leading him in on the actual drop. The lead plane will then take the tanker down into the drop zone, 1/4 mile formation, get that formation slowed down to the appropriate speed, and in the case of the C-130, they can get that down to about 125 knots, and the ideal drop is to be about 125 knots and just 150 feet above the tops of the vegetation before they drop their load. This allows the retardant load to properly disperse and rain down vertically on the foliage below. This puts the air crews in a very tight position, very close to the ground, in very rough conditions every time they make a retardant drop. The fire retardant itself is 85% water, 10% fertilizer, and 5% thickeners, stabilizers, and colorants. The retardant is colored bright pink so the pilots can see where the retardant lays on the ground. By the way, all air tankers have the ability to pickle their load or get rid of all of their retardant load in a very short order. In the C-130, the Colson C-130, they can get rid of that load at a rate of about 1,600 gallons per second and unload the entire 4,000-pound load in about 2.2 seconds. So I hope this gives you a little better background understanding of what's going on with the air tanker operations currently down in Australia. I want to end with a note from my dear friend Jimmy Barnes, who flew for many years right out of here, Grass Valley Air Attack Base. He has safely retired from the air tanker industry after years of duty. Jimmy writes, "On behalf of the membership of the Associated Aerial Firefighters, I can only convey the love and deep sadness that many of our members have expressed after hearing of this heartbreaking news. Every family member of every firefighter that routinely put themselves in harm's way to protect the lives of others has a complete understanding of the terrible cost of firefighting. No words can express our shared grief and our concerns for the families and friends of our fallen heroes. I can only assure our families that in this terrible time of great loss and great sadness that we stand by you. Once the names of our crew have been released, the officers of the Air Tanker Pilots Memorial Fund, I'll put a link below, will take the appropriate action. The family members of our stricken crew, always remember that you are also a member of the family of aerial firefighters and all firefighters everywhere now and forever. From my own personal perspective, and Jimmy's seen this a lot, I can only say that I know the pain of loss when a dear friend has made the ultimate sacrifice while fighting fire. And from my heart, I make this prayer, may God bless and keep these wonderful firefighters always and give their families and friends the strength to endure the terrible pain of their tragic loss. Love and respect, Jimmy Barnes." See you here.